I'm a retired professor of evolutionary biology. I was at Edinburgh University, but I've been retired for about 9 years now. I've been involved in pushing back against the COVID regulations that were introduced in 2020. You may know, or you may not know, that there is at present an official Scottish COVID-19 inquiry going on, and it's hardly been reported on at all by the mainstream media. They spent upwards of more than £26 million on this so far. The Scottish government want to interpret it in their own way. We want the Scottish people to have a look at that same evidence and to draw their own conclusions about what's been going on. And mainstream media are largely responsible for inducing fear in the population. And in order to get free of those restrictions to go to a football match, for instance, then they had to take this novel experimental procedure. There was a huge increase in the use of morphine and midazolam during the first lockdown, and many cases where people giving evidence to the inquiry have said that that's what happened to their loved ones. In not a particularly nice way, because people had described it as being like being waterboarded, because you're you can't breathe properly, but you can't say anything about it. From the evidence at the COVID inquiry, there are quite a number of people who say, my mother didn't die of COVID, it was put on the death certificate. She died of starvation and malnutrition.
Hi there, Richard. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much for coming on. Could you do me a little favour, maybe tell those who don't know who you are a little bit about Richard and a little bit about common knowledge?
Okay, well, I'm a retired professor of evolutionary biology. I was at Edinburgh University, but I've been retired for about 9 years now, and I've spoken at rallies and things, and we used to do the yellow boards to try and get out information to people about what was going on. When that ended, we thought to ourselves, what should we do? And really what people are in need of, and they weren't getting from the mainstream media, was information that they could rely on about what was happening. And so we set up an organization called Common Knowledge. And the object of the organization is to try and put out there the information that people need to negotiate what's happening at the moment and to understand what's happening at the moment. And we also help to build a body of a community of people of like mind, who could share information and talk to one another without the difficulty that was often present at that time, talking to normal people about things to do with COVID and other issues which were coming up at that time. So that's the purpose of Common Knowledge.
So common knowledge started then purely for a COVID sort of exchange of ideas, and it now looks at other things, or have I picked that up wrong?
Yes, yeah, that's right. So we look at a wide diversity of things. So one thing, a number of things we're not actually told about at school or educated about, money, for instance. And then we have sessions on health, alternative health information, which you won't get from the NHS. Other issues that we've tackled are education and the problems of Scottish education and the curriculum which has been imposed on many junior schools upwards, which many parents don't agree with but don't know much about. So it's a means of getting out information about all of these kinds of topics, which otherwise are not reported in the mainstream media.
And you've got quite a large event coming up.
Yes, we have.
Conference.
Yes, it's what we call the Scottish People's COVID Inquiry Conference. You may know, or you may not know, that there is at present an official Scottish COVID-19 inquiry going on, which is set up by the Scottish government. And it's hardly been reported on at all by the mainstream media. They spent upwards of more than £26 million on this so far, and we've hardly heard anything about it. The good thing about it is that transcripts of all the people who've been giving evidence, this is real people giving real evidence about what happened to them during the COVID period. They've been amassed, and you can read them, and I've read all of them in the website which has been set up. And there are also videos of those people giving evidence to the inquiry. And some of that evidence is really harrowing about what they encountered. And what we want to do in this conference, it's a one-day conference, is to have a look at this evidence which has been produced. The Scottish Government want to interpret it in their own way, to learn lessons, as they say. We want the Scottish people to have a look at that same evidence and to draw their own conclusions about what's been going on, and to hold people to account for all of the wrongs that have happened as a consequence of the actions of the Scottish Government.
So the COVID inquiry, the UK one and the Scottish one, are two separate inquiries. Why did they do that? Why have
I
two?
think I think it's because health is a devolved issue, and a lot of what we're talking about here is to do with health and social care, and those are devolved issues. And also, different policies were adopted by those different governments during the period of COVID. So there are some very distinct things which happened in Scotland that never happened in England, and vice versa. So it is legitimate to have two inquiries.
And if if I was a journalist and I was tasked each day to go and get news stories, it's not an easy job, because sometimes the world's not evolving quick enough for you to get a story every day. So you would imagine if this resource is available online and it gives all testimony and it gives all, there's videos there which are easy for, someone to watch and take in what's happening. Why is nobody covering this in the mainstream?
Oh, that's a very good question. One would begin to suspect that they don't want the information which is being given out at these inquiries to go mainstream. A lot of what people encountered during the COVID period was personal to them, and we all have individual experiences. And there are many sectors of the society who we often don't talk to, we don't engage with, and they might have a very different experience from your own. And I think what the mainstream media should be doing is making sure that people understand everyone's experiences, not just your own experiences. And I think they're afraid. I think the Scottish Government's afraid that people will realize the real harms that were done to people, and maybe not in their own immediate circle, but other people in the community. And they never hear about those, and they should hear about those, because there's some real tragedies there.
So the Scottish inquiry, when did that start?
That started, I think, in October 23.
And we're obviously a year and 3 months on from that. When's it concluding, or when did it conclude?
It's divided up into a number of different sections, and there have only been a number of those sections have been looked at so far. It could go on, drag on for a number of years, and the results may never be published until a number of years have passed. And that's really very typical of these big inquiries. It's a way of burying information. By the time the results come out, we've seen that with the post office inquiries, and we're seeing it with other inquiries as well. The results only come out when it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, and people have moved on, and the people, if there's any wrongdoings or non-positions, etc., certainly if there's no criminality, there's not that. But if someone's done something wrong in their job that could have got them disciplined or lose their jobs, then it's not going to happen. Yeah, and that's true. So wait, is it running parallel with the UK
Yeah,
inquiry?
they're going on at the
Timescale?
same time. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. So and one might have more prominence than another. At the moment, they're looking at COVID-19 vaccine injuries in the UK inquiry.
Yeah.
And they have been looking at business, I think, more recently in the Scottish COVID inquiry. Um, our, um, our conference, which we're holding, is based around the information that came out, health and social care. That was the section that was dealt with first, and that's the one which we have most comprehensive information on at the moment.
So you must have spent some time, I mean, amount of data, information, videos and stuff you've been able to access, and you must have heard and read some harrowing stories.
I
Out
have.
of all the stuff that you have heard, from the evidence, it's personal evidence from people, not just scientific stuff. I'll come on to that later. But the personal stories, what's the most harrowing? What one sort of caught you and thought, no, this is wrong?
Well, there's some very harrowing ones about people in long term in care homes where people were not able to visit those people in care homes. So families were unable to visit their loved ones. Their loved ones are often isolated for matters of not just months but years, separated from their family. And they had these horrific visits, which were allowed from time to time, were called window visits, where the window was actually shut. They were not allowed to touch their relatives, despite the fact that their carers were fully able to touch, and cuddle those people. But those who were related to them were unable to actually touch them and give them reassurance. And these are people who had often had Alzheimer's disease.
Mm-hmm.
They felt they had been utterly abandoned by their families.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
sometimes they were held back from, they tried to rush forward towards their families to cuddle them. And and they couldn't. And they were held back by their carers. And often they died alone with no one there. And then they were put into disposable bags if they'd been uh, uh, it, if it's deemed that they had died of COVID. And then there were funerals in which there were closed coffins, so they couldn't even touch, they couldn't look at their loved ones in the funeral home. And there were very small numbers of people allowed at the funerals. And that meant that, say, sometimes sisters, close relatives could not come to the funeral, and that caused anguish in the family. And sometimes those people are not speaking to one another because they weren't invited. You know, members of the family.
yeah,
Families
yeah.
have been disrupted by these things. That's just kind of one example, but there are many other things, and uh, other people where they had power of attorney over their loved ones in a care home, and they took and do not resuscitate order was placed on their relatives. The do not resuscitate order doesn't just mean that if somebody's ill that you don't uh, apply cardiac uh, pressure and things to revive them. It meant in this case that if you had one of those on you and you were in a care home, you would not be taken into hospital if you became ill for any other reason. Basically, your medical care was removed from you. And and in some cases, somebody found the do not resuscitate orders, and their signatures had been forged, and and whole care homes were given do not resuscitate orders. That it wasn't an individual basis; it was just applied to the whole of the care home.
So, who made these decisions?
The Scottish government must have made these decisions, and the associated, and we have uh, the uh, the NHS uh, in Scotland being responsible for these
Right.
measures.
So, someone at high up has decided that that's how we're going to treat it. These do not resuscitate, etc.
Somebody must have done that. We don't know exactly know who made the decision. That's one of the things that we need to find out.
Establish, and then obviously that the orders basically, gravity will take effect and it'll get down to the frontline workers
Exactly.
to carry it out. But I don't think anybody high up would pass an order to forge signatures. So does this sort of stuff come into play at ground level where certain care homes have just decided we're going to, or certain individuals in certain care homes have decided we're just going to forge these
I
signatures? Is
think,
that what's going on
yeah,
here?
I don't know. I don't know the details. I guess this is the kind of thing that one needs to find out. Uh, care homes are put in a difficult position because often their staff are very, because of the COVID measures, they were understaffed
Yeah,
because
yeah.
people were isolating. They had
Mm.
very difficult conditions, and they were being pressured by the NHS to put these do not resuscitate orders on them. And GPs actually uh, went down their list and they rang up people. Some of the people were actually they were relatively young people in their 50s, and they got a phone call and said, "Do you mind? We're going to put a DNR notice on you." And in one case, the only reason why they were doing it was the person was a bit deaf. They weren't close to the end of their lives. It's absolutely amazing.
But I mean, why would you have sort of wide scale do not resuscitate? Why would that even become almost a policy, a part of a procedure? To, I mean, these would normally, in normal circumstances, I would imagine, only come into play at real end of life stages,
Exactly. Yes.
where or when someone's that maybe had an accident and we know that the quality of life they're going to have going forward is not going to be fantastic. So these are quite personal, and I would imagine each one is very unique to the next one. So what was it? I mean, that's a question you can't answer, but what's your opinion on why would you come up with this and have wide scale DNRs? It beggars belief in my simple thinking.
Yeah. Well, obviously, one of the things that it will, I'm not going to say that this is the reason why it is, but what I'm just going to say is one of what will be the result of this. The result of this will be that if you've got widespread DNRs put on people, and that means they're not going to get their medical care.
Mm-hmm.
That means that you're going to increase the rate of death of those
Mm-hmm.
people. You're going to bring forward the rate of death of those people. And uh, we know that one of the things that the First Minister did at the beginning of the COVID era is grandstanding with the numbers of people dying. And there were a lot of people who were dying in this manner, and they were the ones who she was talking about. They were the statistics that she was using to tell you that COVID was a very serious disease.
Absolutely scary. So, do you think this DNR thing that you're talking about was that unique to Scotland?
No, it wasn't unique to Scotland. It also occurred in England as well, in England and Wales. Yeah, yeah.
And do we know if this happened in other countries out with the UK?
Um, I I think that the procedures elsewhere are rather different from what we have. I haven't. I don't have any information about
Because
other
there's,
countries.
there's something that often crosses my mind with things when you have the same thing happening in different areas, and this has different areas because health in Scotland was different to health, is different to health in the rest of the UK. And during COVID, it seemed to me that some people wanted to make that divide even greater during how we would handle COVID and try and wring out as much devolved powers as possible through
That's true.
COVID. If we could do anything
Yeah,
different up here, it seemed to be we would hang a bit of tartan on it just to be different from other people. And I thought that was I thought the best practice is best practice, regardless if you're living in Carlisle or 20 miles up the road, both across the
yeah,
border. But we had two slightly different, there weren't massive differences, but there were, quite important differences in how we
yeah.
react.
One of the most important ones was the length of time of which restrictions were applied, and especially these restrictions which limited access to care homes. So those kind of things went on much longer in Scotland than they did in England.
Mhm, mhm. And did they have to? Did they provide much evidence to support these decisions?
No, that's one would anticipate these decisions. So locking up people, preventing them having social contact with other people, is actually uh, uh, it's trashing people's human rights.
Yeah.
And in the inquiry, the human rights lawyers uh, indicated that there were at least three of the human rights which were trashed, Articles 2, 3, and 8
Oh, yeah.
of the human rights. And if you're going to do something as drastic as that, you need to do uh, balance up the risks of what's going to happen with the
Mhm.
benefits. And no benefit risk analysis appears to have been done at all. These measures were just implemented without a thought to what the consequences would be, especially to this people in care homes, the particularly vulnerable. And Jean Freeman, who was the health secretary at the time, she said she regretted any deaths that occurred as a consequence of these. She didn't say sorry, and she didn't say, I should have foreseen this or anything like that. And anyone with an ounce of common sense will know that if you lock up people, and they're especially people who have maybe have Alzheimer's disease, and they're unable to contact their families, who are often supporting them emotionally and actually physically as well, going in and helping them to eat, for instance, or going in just giving them a cuddle, going to reading with them, um, having some little activity with them, keeping them going. If you take that away from them, they will die, and they did die. And there were some people also who were prevented from um, exercising in their normal way, and they committed suicide.
And hindsight is a wonderful thing. And, depending on your thoughts on whether this was a real thing or not, if you are a person who's a politician, you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist, you're not medically trained, and you face this challenge, which you believe is to be true, because it's debatable whether it is or it isn't a thing, is the whole
Mhm,
COVID
mhm,
thing. So that's maybe a debate for another day. But either way, you're faced with this thing, and it's challenging, and there's some tough decisions to be made. Now, if I was the First Minister of Scotland or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and you're not, you don't have the knowledge to make these decisions unhelped, and you go to these professionals, did we pick the right people?
In my opinion, no. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but
Mhm.
I predicted all of these things that would happen as a consequence, and that serious consequences. You don't need to be a doctor to understand about about health and the need for society of people
Mhm.
in order to remain healthy. We understand that we put people in solitary confinement as one of the worst punishments you could possibly give to people,
Yeah.
and their health is likely to deteriorate as a consequence. So I don't think there's any excuse for saying, "Oh, well, I'm not a health expert." You will know from human nature what
Mhm.
the consequences of you doing this will
Mhm.
be.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think they obviously got experts who said this is okay. I challenged those experts, and on BBC Radio 4 or Radio Scotland, I was called a flat earther.
Okay.
And that's the kind of attitude that was given. If anyone raised any concerns uh, against these measures, um, you were suppressed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's horrific to hear. But I think you've got to always try and apply common sense and logic when you're problem solving. And these were problems that, we faced as a society. and there wasn't, by the sounds of it, much common sense or logic put into them. But it's frightening because I was just talking to this about this sort of topic last night, COVID in general, and in about 8 weeks will be the 5th anniversary of us getting Boris Johnson on our TVs telling us go home and don't come out, save the NHS. And in some instances, it seems like it was a lifetime ago, but I think the majority of things I think of during that time, it's a bit frightening that it's just went like that. It doesn't seem as if it was 5 years ago, and getting that call. And I just think what was strange about it to me, and you can say this about a lot of things in society just now. We did as society, the sort of Western, modern cultures, we tended to deal with it almost the same everywhere, right?
Yes.
And we do that with a lot of things, like, let's say, the gender issue, which is another interesting topic that could take days to discuss. So let's take things like that and a lot of social things, where surprisingly to me, governments all around the world end up doing the same thing at the same time. And you think, how does that happen? How is it possible that the Prime Minister, or I think, is it Prime Minister they have in Canada, or President? So he can make a decision on, I don't know if he's the Prime Minister or the President.
He's not anymore.
He made enough mess of that. So he makes a decision in Canada, which is the exact same decision as Nicola Sturgeon would make in Holyrood, and the same decision that the guy in Australia would make. And I think, well, that's pretty peculiar that all these people, so many times on so many different topics, almost instantaneously have the same thoughts. And I find that most bizarre, without putting a tinfoil hat on and being called a flat earther just because you're questioning things. That gets to me quite a lot with quite a lot of things. And COVID was one of them, because it seemed to be, there was pockets like Sweden and the guy in Belarus, and there was little pockets of people that done things different or slightly different. But it did seem to be almost a global thing. Well, a global thing as much as the countries the media decided to follow. I don't really know much about what's on in Africa or Asia, but Europe and the Western, North American stuff. And I just find that most bizarre. And this, you've obviously, you're more learned on the topic than me. Is this something that was similar in COVID, where we almost had a global reaction?
Yes, we did. Yeah. So in the States, they had very much the same thing. Curiously, in Australia and New Zealand, they didn't have any outbreak of a respiratory disease, but they still put people into quarantine. And in Melbourne, I think in Australia, they had the most horrendous lockdown for months, and they didn't even have any disease then. So yes, it looks very much like a coordinated reaction.
Mm-hmm. So, when this happens, you've got a lot of people, New World Orders and governments within governments and all this sort of stuff. And it doesn't help the argument when some people try to suggest these things aren't real, or I think the problem is you get so many people attach different names to this thing, this theory. And when you from New World Orders to the Illuminati to Davos and then obviously, like all conspiracies, you need to tell everybody it was the Masons as well. Which tells me the Masons must have done a lot of things. Anyway, but when you've got so many different versions of what could be the reality, I don't think that helps people understand and sort of grab
No, it doesn't.
the importance of what is going on here, or what could be going on. To be honest, so
I agree. I think we ought to look at what is our situation. I think, and one of the purposes of the conference is to say, look, I want to know about what happened here in Scotland, because that's what affects me. And what were the things that were done? Who was responsible? Why did they do it like that? Because it seems completely irrational what they did. And can we call these people to account? And different things were different in different countries. And I think other people in England should do the same for what happened in England. Other people in the
Yeah.
States should do the same for what happened in the States. And that is one way of trying to sort things out rather than some amorphous trying to combat something which is we don't even know about. And then we'll just get ridiculed for whatever theories
Yeah.
we might have about that. That's
Yeah.
not important. What's important's happened. It's really happened to real people here in Scotland, and we need to have some uh, accountability for what's
Mhm.
happened. And if people can do that likewise in other parts of the world, then that's what we can do. That's a positive thing
Yeah.
that we can do, and we can get people talking about these things and realizing just how much damage was done and how open they are to that happening all over again if we're not careful.
Well, and that's the thing. I think the majority of people were scared. It was a
Yeah.
frightening time. Our initial human reaction and priority became protect our own. Make sure our elderly our little unit is safe. And if everybody looks after their own bubble, then that's where we kind of were. You want to make sure your parents and people's grandparents and elderly were safe as first. That seems to be where you go. And when you're fed this narrative of this thing that kills the elderly and the weak quicker than middle aged and young, then that's where automatically your thoughts are. However, it doesn't seem as if those who guide society had their priorities the same as normal people. And I think the thing that people, when they're faced with the reality that this could possibly have maybe been planned or just been terribly thought out, that we actually as a society killed old people by our actions, it's quite a difficult thing to say. Yeah, I'm taking that. I'm going to own that thought, because it then opens up so much. And I'm struggling to go. The common sense, logical outcome is somebody somewhere made this decision, and people carried out these decisions and interpreted them slightly different in some places where they were going as far as forging signatures. And it makes me feel uncomfortable that we are actually, whether we like it or not, part of a society that's done that. And that's
We,
probably why a lot of people just rubbish the theory
we,
and don't
yeah,
want to even listen. Because
agree.
accepting the theory, I think, is scarier
It
than
is.
just ignoring it.
Yeah.
Um, and that is pretty horrific. I mean, I was quite emotional when you were telling me the story at the start, when you're telling us about the personal things, people not being able to cuddle with their loved ones, feed them, and stuff like that. My throat was wobbling a bit. Um, and to think we'd done these things deliberately, it's a horrible thought. So the conference is going to cover it's going to cover the sort of whole story, the whole timeline of COVID, or is it just going to cover what's been done so far in the Scottish inquiry?
The aim of the conference is to try and put these personal experiences into perspective. So we wanted to start out off with asking somebody who's in public health, a retired public health person, are the measures which were imposed those which would have been done in, say, 2019? What plans did we have in place? Did we have plans to, if we had an outbreak of a respiratory disease, did we have plans in place to put people into quarantine? And the answer is no. These are things that were done here go completely against what was put forward as the rational plan in case of a respiratory disease outbreak. Okay, so that's to establish that the things that were done were not what was expected.
Hmm.
And we want to have someone else look at what did the mainstream media do? The mainstream media are largely responsible for inducing fear in the population.
Yeah.
And the Scottish government, obviously, and NHS commissioned adverts, whose purpose was to induce fear. And I remember one which I thought was particularly loathsome, was about a granddaughter and a grandfather, and it showed the granddaughter covered in slime, which was kind of meant to represent some sort of deadly entity, and kissing her grandfather and passing this slime onto her grandfather. And the message was, don't kill your grandfather. And I just thought that was just morally reprehensible. So there's a section there on, okay, what do the media do in order to generate fear? And then I want to have a look at what the actions were and what the consequence will be expected to be, then have a look at what actually happened, and then go on to, we've got this terrible disease here. The only way out of it is to take a novel medical procedure. And we generated the fear has been generated. People are so fearful, they will take a novel medical procedure if they're told that that's the way out. Though actually what they're escaping from is the restrictions that were placed by the Scottish government on them. And in order to get free of those restrictions to go to a football match, for instance, then they had to take this novel experimental procedure. And so the one thing leads on to the others. So and then that novel medicine was given to everybody, or attempted to be given to almost everybody, including children. And we'll have somebody who's an expert on medical ethics talking about whether that was ethical, and then we'll have someone else talking about what the effects of that has been and the damage that might have been caused by that. So, and then we want to end up by saying, okay, we've seen the picture now. What are the questions we need to ask of the people who made these decisions? We want answers, and we'd like a concerted body of people to ask those questions so that they can't just escape from those questions. We need a concerted effort to find out what really went on. It's no good doing it with ones and twos. We need a body of people to do that.
So, Richard, something that a lot of people more qualified to me I've heard discussing is the protocols that went on during COVID. Could you tell me a bit more about them and where you see issues?
Okay, so there are possibly two important protocols that were put in place for the treatment of people with suspected COVID-19, so the respiratory disease, which was suspected to be COVID-19. The first of those was that antibiotics should not be used on such patients. This is despite the fact that for other respiratory diseases, antibiotics are usually prescribed, especially if it's a serious infection, because you want to prevent bacterial pneumonia setting in. So these patients who were suspected of having COVID-19 were not given these. And we can see in the prescribing data that there was a great drop in the use of antibiotics during the first COVID lockdown, corresponding to the use of this application of this protocol, leaving people effectively defenseless against bacterial pneumonia setting in.
Are you saying pre-COVID, if anybody had respiratory problems, then that would be a normal thing to do? Would we give them antibiotics?
It's not a novel thing to do. No, that would be what you would normally treat.
Yeah, that's what's normal.
Yeah,
it must be my teeth.
So withholding it is completely, yeah. So withholding it is completely against.
Yeah, not the norm. So why would anybody? And again, was this something that was unique to Scotland, or was this a sort of way the world dealt with it at the time?
These were nice protocols, so they would have applied across the NHS.
But would they have went across the world? I mean, they're obviously pan-UK, but would it went Europe? Did other countries do similar, where they stopped prescribing antibiotics for people that could really have done with it?
I'm not sure about the details of elsewhere. It was certainly the case in the UK. Yeah,
and that just seems peculiar.
That seems very peculiar. The excuse given was that this was supposed to be a viral disease and antibiotics don't work on viral diseases. But of course, If the disease progresses, then it progresses to a bacterial pneumonia, and especially in old people, that's something that you want to prevent occurring, because then the life is really threatened. The second protocol that was put in place was, I think sometimes it was called just in case protocol, and it is a protocol which is for end of life care, so it's appropriate for end of life care. And so this was if uh, the uh, physician or the doctor had said that nothing more should be done, then this would be put in place, kind of effectively writing off the person. And what this was prescribing of midazolam and morphine, which respiratory inhibitors, and put people into a state where they basically they can't complain about what's happening to them. And this was there was a huge increase in the use of morphine and midazolam during the first lockdown, and many cases where people giving evidence to the inquiry have said that that's what happened to their loved ones, despite the fact that they may have said, we don't want this to happen. So,
Wow.
and yeah, and some of the people in the care homes, the doctors didn't go into the care homes, but they could prescribe over the telephone. And one of the care home people said that, majority of the cases that if an elderly person was ill, well, that's one of the things that they would prescribe, this end of life care pathway. Um,
Regardless of
Regardless,
what their illness was.
not having seen the person. I mean, to be able to diagnose something over the telephone is an extremely difficult thing to do, and most doctors would say that actually you have to see the patient to be able to properly prescribe it, especially such powerful drugs as that,
Yeah,
and to do that over the phone.
scary.
Uh, and,
So these this protocol, they're both scary, but I think this end of life one particularly off-putting. So this was a protocol put in place by our government.
yes,
Wow. And it basically now, so what you're saying is the combination of morphine and the one that I always struggle to mention,
midazolam, yeah,
right? The combination of those are basically going to put you to sleep. They're going
yes.
to stop your
Yeah,
respiratory system, slow it
and
down,
also
and basically,
in not a particularly nice way, because people had described it as being like being waterboarded, because you're kind of you can't breathe properly, but you can't say anything about it, because you've been sedated. So you're not struggling, but you're probably trying to struggle for breath. Yeah, it's not a particularly nice way to die.
So, Richard, unfortunately, it sounds as if these protocols potentially have given us some deaths by design, possibly, or disaster, whether it was intentional or just stupidity. I don't know at this point. It's a discussion for another day. But I know there's been some controversy over death certificates, etc. And as I take it, that's something you'll cover at the conference. So, what's your own thoughts on that? And you can maybe share some stories and experiences, please.
Yeah, well, I from the evidence of the COVID inquiry, there are quite a number of people who say, my mother didn't die of COVID. It was put on the death certificate. She died of starvation and malnutrition. Um, and there are other people who say, well, I very much doubt that COVID was the cause, but it was put on the death certificate. My own personal experience is was down in England. My father had heart failure, and he was in hospital. He was tested there for COVID, and 2 days before he died, he tested positive for COVID. And on the death certificate, the cause of death was COVID, and he died of heart failure. anyone could see that was the case. So I have personal experience of this misattribution, and it's very convenient for the government, if they are going to put out a narrative that there's a deadly disease, to have lots of things attributed to COVID. But there's ample evidence that many of these, which are attributed to COVID on the death certificate, were nothing of the kind. And they changed the rules for the death certificates as well. So I believe that the doctor didn't actually have to be there to see the body to say that that was death was by COVID. So it was a presumption.
Yeah. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and I think some will never get answers to, Richard. Yeah. So thanks very much for your time today. And for those
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for those who have been, you've caught their interest and they maybe want to attend the conference, I'll put a link in the description of the video with a link. But it's in Edinburgh. What's the dates and the times of it, Richard?
It's the 22nd of February, Saturday, the 22nd of February. It lasts all day. So the doors open at 9 o'clock. We start at 9:45. We aim to finish at 4:30. We have a list of invited speakers, and we have someone who will in person tell their own testimony. We'd love people to come along and tell us about what their experiences was during that period of time, and to help us formulate the questions that need to be asked and the people who we need to ask those questions of.
And from my understanding, you're going to have some experts there who can give some limited opinion.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. We'll have Dr. Claire Craig, who's been very important in analysing data, and she's a pathologist, and she'll be talking about harms of the COVID-19 vaccines. Alan Mordew will be there. He's a retired public health doctor. We'll be having Liz Evans, who's an expert on medical ethics, and we also have Martin Neal, who's jointly written a book called Fighting Goliath, which is about corruption of the statistics which have been put out by a number of government departments on COVID topics.
And you'll have also you're expecting to have some members of the public who will be talking about their personal.
Yeah, and that's right. Someone who will be talking about their personal experiences. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much for your time today. It's been great talking to you and Harrowing some of the stories and information you've been sharing. But then I wish you good luck, and I'll see you at the conference. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.